Elizabeth Whitmore pressed both hands flat against the kitchen table and closed her eyes when she heard the carriage wheels on the gravel drive. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times. What she would say. What she would not say. What she would never let him see on her face. But the second the front door opened and Nathaniel Carter stepped into the light, tall, composed, carrying a leather satchel, she recognized as the kind lawyers used, every rehearsed word left her body like breath in winter air. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow every part until the end, and drop your city in the comments below so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Virginia, July 1817. The summer heat had been sitting heavy over Whitmore Hill for 3 days straight, the kind of heat that made the air feel like wet wool pressed against your skin, that turned the dirt roads pale and cracked and silent. Elizabeth had not slept the night before. She had lain in the narrow bed in the east room, not the main bedroom, not the room she and Nathaniel had briefly shared in those first strange, careful weeks of marriage, and she had stared at the ceiling and pressed one hand flat against her stomach and breathed. Just breathed. Because breathing was the only thing she could do that did not require her to decide anything. 9 days ago, Dr. Harlan Prentice had sat across from her in his small examination room on the edge of Millhaven and told her in his plain, unhurried way that she was with child. He had said it the way men like him said difficult things, directly, without ornament, watching her face to see what the news would do to it. She had not cried. She had thanked him. She had paid for the visit with coins she kept in a cloth pouch inside her sewing basket. The money her father had pressed into her hands when she married, saying, "Keep something that is only yours, Eliza. A woman should always have something that is only hers." She had walked home alone 3 miles on the summer road, and she had not told a single soul. Not her cousin Martha, who visited twice weekly and noticed everything. Not Hattie, the older woman, who kept the house and clucked over Elizabeth like a worried hen. Not the Reverend Aldous, her father's old friend, who still checked on her out of loyalty to the man she had buried in April. And certainly not Nathaniel. She had told no one, because she understood with a clarity that surprised her exactly what the news would do if it reached the wrong ears before she was ready. It would not bring her husband home. It would bring him home for the wrong reasons. And Elizabeth Whitmore, Elizabeth Carter, though she rarely thought of herself by that name, had made a private and irrevocable decision somewhere on that long walk home. She would not be anyone's obligation. Not again. Not ever again. The carriage arrived at 9:30 in the morning. She heard it before she saw it, the sound of hooves on gravel. 2 horses, the particular creak of well-maintained wheels that spoke of money and distance traveled. Hattie came through the back of the house calling her name before Elizabeth had even moved from the kitchen window. "Miss Eliza." Hattie's voice had a careful quality to it. "Miss Eliza, there is a—" "I know," Elizabeth said. "I heard it." She set down the cup she was holding. She smoothed the front of her white cotton dress, practical, plain, the kind of dress a woman wore when she intended to work rather than receive visitors. She did not go to change it. She would meet him exactly as she was. She would not perform any version of herself for Nathaniel Carter's benefit. She walked to the front of the house and opened the door herself before he could knock. Howe was standing on the top step, his hat in one hand and the leather satchel in the other, and for just a moment, one unguarded, terrible moment, she let herself look at him the way she used to look at him before everything went wrong. Howe was still the same man. Dark hair a little longer than she remembered. The kind of face that had been shaped by outdoor work and indoor restraint, in equal measure angular, careful, not easily read. He was wearing his good coat despite the heat, which meant he had dressed deliberately for this, which meant he had thought about it, which meant it was not impulsive. Nathaniel Carter did nothing impulsively. "Elizabeth," he said. "Nathaniel," she said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then he said, "May I come in?" She stepped back from the door without answering, which was answer enough. He came into the front room and stood near the window, his hat still in his hand, and he looked around the room, the way people look at places they feel responsible for, but no longer entirely comfortable in. His eyes moved over the simple furniture, the shelves of her father's books, the small vase of dried wildflowers on the side table that Hattie kept replacing out of pure stubbornness. "You've kept the place well," he said. "I always keep things well," Elizabeth said. "That is not why you came 3 days by road." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and something moved through his expression that she could not name and did not entirely trust. "No," he said, "it isn't." He set the satchel on the table between them and unfastened the brass latch and drew out a folded document, heavy paper official sealing wax pressed flat, the kind of document that had been prepared by a man who understood the law and billed handsomely for the understanding. "My uncle retained a solicitor," Nathaniel said. "There is a legal argument to be made." He paused, seemed to choose his next words with the kind of care that meant he had rehearsed them too. "The original marriage documents were filed improperly. There is a procedural deficiency in the county record. My uncle believes, and the solicitor agrees, that the marriage can be dissolved, cleanly, without scandal, without any formal fault attributed to either party." Elizabeth did not touch the document. She looked at it the way she might look at a dead thing on the road, noting its existence, refusing to be alarmed by it. "Your uncle believes," she said. "Yes." "And what do you believe, Nathaniel?" Howe was quiet for too long. That silence was its own kind of answer, and they both knew it. "I believe," he said carefully, "that you deserve better than a marriage held together by legal obligation and nothing else. I believe that you are young and capable, and—" "Stop." Her voice was quiet. It did not shake. "Please stop talking about what I deserve, as though it is a thing you have the authority to determine." He stopped. "You came here," she said, "with papers, your uncle's solicitor prepared to dissolve a marriage you entered into of your own free will, and you are framing it as a kindness to me." She looked at him steadily. "I want you to hear yourself say that, Nathaniel. I want you to stand in my father's house and say those words out loud and listen to what they sound like." Something crossed his face. Discomfort or possibly shame, though, with Nathaniel Carter. The two were nearly indistinguishable. "That is not—" He stopped, started again. "That is not the whole of it." "Then tell me the whole of it." Another silence. Outside, a mockingbird was carrying on at considerable volume, indifferent to the human difficulty unfolding beneath it. "Charlotte Hamilton," Nathaniel said finally. Elizabeth had known the name was coming. She had known it the way you know a storm is coming when the light changes in the afternoon, not from certainty, but from the body's quiet reading of signs. "Your uncle's choice," she said. "My family's expectation. That is not the same as your choice." "No," he said very quietly. "It isn't." She wanted to ask him. Then, she wanted to ask him directly, plainly, the way her father had taught her to ask the questions that mattered. "Do you love her? Did you ever love me? Is there any part of you that came here hoping I would give you a reason to stay?" She did not ask, because she was afraid of what any of the three answers would do to her, and she had promised herself on that long summer walk home from Dr. Prentice's office that she would not do anything that felt like begging. Not for love, not for loyalty, not for the basic human acknowledgement that she was a person and not a problem to be administratively resolved. "Sit down," she said instead. "Hattie will bring coffee." He seemed surprised by that. She could see it in the slight shift of his posture. He had come prepared for tears, or for anger, or for cold refusal. He had not come prepared for coffee. "Elizabeth." "Sit down, Nathaniel. We are going to have this conversation, like two adults who once meant something to each other, and we are going to do it properly." He sat. Hattie came with coffee and corn cake, and the expression of a woman who was doing her absolute best not to eavesdrop while clearly hearing every single word through the kitchen doorway. She set the tray down without comment, gave Nathaniel the look she reserved for people who had disappointed her, and left with dignity. Elizabeth poured. She handed him his cup. She sat across from him with her own and waited. "Tell me what your uncle offered," she said. He set his hat on this table beside the satchel and wrapped both hands around the cup. "The Whitmore Hill property remains in your name. The land, the house, the outbuildings, all of it. There would be a yearly allowance paid quarterly. Enough to live on comfortably. More than comfortably." He paused. "You would want for nothing material." "Nothing material," Elizabeth repeated. Yes. And in exchange, I sign the document and become a woman whose marriage was dissolved on a legal technicality before she is 25 years old. He did not answer that directly, which was itself an answer. The allowance would be generous, he said again, as though the repetition of it might improve its reception. I understand that, Elizabeth said. I understand the offer very well. Your uncle has been thorough. She looked at the document on the table without picking it up. What he has not been is honest about his reasons. Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. He believes Charlotte Hamilton is a better match. For the family's interests. For the family's interests, she said. Not for yours. They are not always separate things. They are always separate things, Nathaniel. A man who does not know the difference between his interests and his family's interests is a man who has spent his whole life doing what other people decided was correct and calling it his own choice. The words landed harder than she had intended. She saw it in his face, the slight flinch, the way his hands tightened around the cup, the way he looked away toward the window before he looked back at her. That is, he started. True, she said. I know it is true because you know it is true. Silence again. The mockingbird had stopped. Somewhere far off, one of the field hands was calling to another in a voice too distant to make out the words. I am not trying to wound you, Elizabeth said more quietly. I am trying to be honest with you, which is apparently something no one around you does regularly enough. He looked at her for a long moment. You have always been honest with me, he said. Even when I did not want you to be. Yes, she said. And where did it get me? That question sat between them like the document on the table present, unavoidable, requiring a response that neither of them was entirely prepared to give. It was Nathaniel who finally reached for the document again. He did not slide it toward her. He just held it, turning it in his hands once the way a man holds a thing he is not quite sure he wants to put down. I did not come here to hurt you, he said. I want you to believe that. I believe you believe it, Elizabeth said. That is not the same thing as it being true. Elizabeth, you left in February, she said. You left in February, and you wrote me 4 letters in 5 months, and 3 of those letters were primarily about estate business. The 4th one asked if the north fence had been repaired. She kept her voice level. She was proud of herself for that, for the steadiness of it, the absence of the trembling. She could feel somewhere underneath the surface, well controlled, pressed down. You did not ask how I was. You did not ask if I needed anything. You did not ask if I was lonely or frightened or struggling. You asked about the fence. He had the grace not to defend himself. And then, she continued, your uncle writes to me in June, not you, your uncle, with a preliminary legal notice about the procedural deficiency in the marriage documents. I received that from your uncle Nathaniel, not from you. I know, he said. It came out low. So do not sit in my father's house and tell me you did not come here to hurt me, because the choice to let your uncle write that letter instead of writing it yourself was a choice, and it hurt, and you knew it would. She looked at him steadily. What you came here not to do is acknowledge how you hurt me. There is a difference. Nathaniel set the document back on the table. He pressed one hand over his face briefly, and then dropped it. You are right, he said. She had not expected that. You are right, he said again, as though saying it twice made the acknowledgement more honest. I handled it badly. The letter I should have come myself. I should have come months ago before any of this reached the point of legal documents and solicitors. He looked at his hands. I did not know what to say to you. That is not an excuse. It is the truth. What stopped you? Elizabeth asked. He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter than it had been. I was afraid of what you would say if I came back and tried to explain myself. Afraid, she said. Of me. Of what I would see in your face, he said. Of whether or not I could stand it. Elizabeth looked at him for a long time. Something moved through her. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not yet, but something that was the precursor to it. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of a man telling the truth about something he would rather not have said aloud. Nathaniel, she said very carefully. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, not diplomatically, Not with the kind of answer that protects everyone's feelings. Honestly. "All right," he said. "Do you want this marriage to be over?" The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Outside the open window, the heat pressed down on everything, and the whole Virginia countryside seemed to hold its breath. "I don't know," he said finally. It came out rough, like something caught in the throat. "God help me, I don't know." And Elizabeth Whitmore, who had pressed both hands flat against a kitchen table that morning, and closed her eyes, and rehearsed her composure, felt her carefully rehearsed composure fracture, not completely, not visibly, but in the place underneath where the real things lived, because "I don't know" was not a yes. And she had expected a yes. She had steeled herself for a yes. She had built the whole architecture of her morning around withstanding a yes. "I don't know" was so much harder to withstand. She stood up from the table. She crossed to the window, not to look at anything in particular, but because she needed to put a few feet of space between herself and the document and the man and the feeling that was pressing up against the inside of her chest, like something that had run out of room. She stood at the window with her back to him, and her hands clasped in front of her, and she looked out at the summer yard, at the old oak tree, at the edge of the property, at the fence her father had built with his own hands 30 years ago, at the road that ran down toward the valley, and she breathed. She pressed one hand briefly against her stomach. Then she dropped it. "I cannot make that decision for you," she said, still facing the window. "That has never been something I would do. You know that about me." "I know," he said. "What I can tell you," she said, "is that I will not sign a document because your uncle believes it is convenient. I will not be dissolved on a technicality because Charlotte Hamilton has a better family name and a larger dowry. If you want to end this marriage, Nathaniel, you are going to have to look me in the eye and tell me, not your uncle, not a solicitor, not a piece of heavy paper with a wax seal, that you want it to be over." She turned back to face him. "Can you do that?" she asked. He looked at her across the room. The morning light was full and honest between them, the way summer light is, without mercy or flattery, just illumination. He opened his mouth. He closed it. "No," he said. He stayed for the rest of the morning. Not because she invited him to exactly, but because neither of them made a move toward ending the conversation, and Hattie brought more coffee without being asked, and the day moved forward, the way days do, indifferent to human turmoil, requiring nothing of them, except that they continue to occupy time. They did not speak for a while about the document. They spoke instead about smaller things, about the north fence, which had in fact been repaired, about the condition of the summer crops in the lower field, about the roof leak above the east room that had developed in March and been addressed imperfectly. Practical things. Safe things. But Elizabeth was aware through all of it of what she was not saying. She was aware of it. The way you are aware of a stone in your shoe, not agonizing, not disabling, but present in every step, impossible to ignore for long. 9 days ago, Dr. Prentice had told her she was carrying a child. Nathaniel Carter's child. And Nathaniel Carter was sitting in her father's front room, talking about fence repairs, and she had not told him, and she had made herself a promise, and she intended to keep it. She would not use this child as a bargaining chip. She would not allow the life inside her to become the reason a man stayed who did not want to stay. She would not look back in 10 years at a marriage held together by obligation and call it love, and teach her child that obligation was the same thing. Her own mother had done that, had stayed in a life that was more duty than joy, and had died at 42 with the particular exhaustion of a woman who had spent her best years performing contentment she did not feel. Elizabeth had sat at her mother's bedside in those last weeks and understood, young as she was, barely 16, that whatever her own life became, she would not let it be that. She would not be kept. She would not be a problem that had been managed. She would be chosen freely and knowingly, or she would not be chosen at all. Nathaniel left at midday. He took the satchel with him and the document inside it unsigned. He stood at the door, the same way he had stood at the beginning. Hat in hand, composed, unreadable, in the way that she had come to understand, meant he was feeling something he did not know how to say. "I will be in Millhaven for a few days," he said. "At the Laurel Inn. If you need." He stopped. "If you want to talk." "I know where the Laurel Inn is," Elizabeth said. He nodded. He put his hat on. He looked at her one more time in that direct, careful way, like a man reading a letter. He is not sure he understands. And then he walked to the carriage and climbed in, and the driver turned the horses, and they moved back down the gravel drive toward the road. Elizabeth stood in the doorway and watched until the carriage was out of sight. Then she went inside, and she sat at the kitchen table, and she put both hands flat against the wood, and she closed her eyes. And for the first time since February, she let herself feel exactly how afraid she was. Not of him, not of the document, not even of the future in its vast, unresolvable uncertainty. She was afraid of the single moment, and she knew it was coming. She could feel it gathering like a storm on the summer horizon when she would no longer be able to keep the secret, when the choice would be made for her by time itself. And she would have to stand in front of Nathaniel Carter and tell him the truth and find out once and for all whether he was a man who would choose her Elizabeth, the woman she was before the document and the letters and the long silence and the fence, or whether he was only a man who would feel obligated. She opened her eyes. She pressed her hands once against the table. She stood up. There was work to be done, and she was still the woman who did it. 3 miles away at the Laurel Inn. Nathaniel Carter sat in a chair by the window of his rented room with the leather satchel open on the bed, and the document lying flat, and the unsigned lines staring back at him like a question he had traveled 3 days to answer and somehow left more open than before. He had come here knowing what he needed to do. He had sat across from Elizabeth Whitmore for 3 hours and found himself unable to do it. Not because of the house, not because of the fence or the dried wildflowers or the practical plain dress she had worn deliberately, he suspected as a kind of declaration. Not even because of the way she had stood at the window with her back to him and her hands clasped in front of her and said, "I will not be dissolved on a technicality." Because of the way she had asked him quiet, direct, no performance in it, "Do you want this marriage to be over?" And he had not been able to say yes. He had thought on the 3-day ride here that he would be able to say yes. He had thought that the distance and the practicality and his uncle's logic and the weight of expectation and the name Charlotte Hamilton would add up to yes in a way that felt like the correct answer to a reasonable question. He sat in the chair by the window and looked at the unsigned document and understood for the first time that what he had been calling practicality was actually something else. He did not yet know the word for it. He would, but not today. Today, there was only the summer heat and the unsigned paper, and the memory of Elizabeth's face, composed, dignified, frightened under the surface in a way she would never have admitted and never allowed him to see, and the single sentence that had followed him 3 miles down the road without his permission. "Can you do that?" The mockingbird outside his window started up again. Nathaniel Carter sat in the heat and the silence and did not answer it. The morning after Nathaniel's visit, Elizabeth woke before sunrise, not because she had slept badly, though she had, but because her body had developed a habit over the past 9 days of pulling her out of sleep at the precise hour when the world was still dark enough to think without interruption. She lay in the narrow East Room bed, with one hand resting on her stomach, and she stared at the ceiling, and she did the thing she had been doing every morning since Dr. Prentice had given her the news. She counted what she had: the house, the land, her father's books, Hattie, the small cloth pouch of coins inside the sewing basket, her own 2 hands, and the education her father had insisted on giving her back when educated daughters were considered a mild eccentricity in a pastor's household. A mind that had always worked better under pressure than under ease. She counted these things deliberately one by one, the way her father had taught her to count blessings not as a comfort exactly, but as an accounting. A woman who knows what she has does not waste time mourning what she doesn't. But this morning, when she reached the end of the list, she found herself adding something she had not intended to add. "I don't know." Not hers. His. Nathaniel's voice, quiet and rough in her father's front room, saying the 2 words she had not prepared herself for. She had prepared for yes. She had prepared for a clean, decisive wound. She had not prepared for something unresolved, something that followed her out of the room and down the road and into her sleep, and was still here at 4 in the morning, sitting in the dark beside everything else she had counted. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. Then she got up, because lying still with difficult thoughts was a luxury she had stopped allowing herself in February. Around the same time, Nathaniel's letters stopped saying anything real. Hattie found her in the kitchen an hour later, already into the bread dough with her sleeves rolled past her elbows, and said nothing for a moment, just stood in the doorway, reading the situation. The way old women who have seen a great deal read situations with their eyes and their intuition, and 40 years of accumulated pattern recognition. "He coming back today?" Hattie asked finally. "I don't know," Elizabeth said. She punched the dough. "He take those papers with him?" "He did. Unsigned." "Unsigned," Elizabeth confirmed. Hattie made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated an entire paragraph of opinion. She moved to the stove and began building the fire with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had done it 10,000 times, and she did not say anything else for a while. Which was, Elizabeth had always thought, one of Hattie's greatest qualities. She knew when talking helped and when it didn't, and she respected the difference. It was Hattie who spoke again eventually without turning from the stove. "Your cousin Martha's coming Thursday. You want me to put her off?" "No," Elizabeth said immediately. Then after a pause, "Yes, not permanently, just not Thursday." Hattie turned just enough to look at her over one shoulder. "How much longer you planning to keep this particular secret, Miss Eliza?" Elizabeth stopped working the dough. "Long as I need to," she said. Hattie turned fully back to the fire and said with the equanimity of a woman who had survived considerably harder things than other people's complicated marriages, "All right then." Nathaniel did not come back that day. He did not come back the day after either. Elizabeth told herself this was fine. She told herself it was in fact exactly what she had wanted: space-time, the absence of pressure. She worked the house. She read. She spent an afternoon in the kitchen garden, with her hands in the soil, doing the particular kind of thinking that only happens when your hands are occupied and your mind is left to work on its own. She thought about her father. James Whitmore had been a quiet man, thoughtful, deliberate, the kind of man who read a page 3 times before turning it, and meant every word he ever said, because he had considered it fully before saying it. He had married her mother for love genuinely, and her mother had loved him genuinely back, and yet there had been between them a particular kind of loneliness that Elizabeth had watched her whole childhood without entirely understanding until she was older. Two good people. Two people who loved each other, and still lonely. Because loving someone, she had come to understand, was not by itself sufficient. You also had to see them. You had to keep looking past the version of them you had decided they were, past the convenient story, past what was comfortable or easy or assumed. You had to keep choosing to look at the actual person in front of you instead of the idea of them you had already formed and grown comfortable with. Her mother had been invisible to her father in certain essential ways, and her father had been invisible to her mother in different essential ways, and neither of them had known how to say so. And the loneliness had lived inside the love, the way a stone lives inside a peach, surrounded, present, unavoidable, once you knew to feel for it. Elizabeth had sworn at 16 at her mother's grave that she would not live that way. And then she had married Nathaniel Carter, who was quiet and deliberate and careful with words in the same way her father had been, and she had thought stupidly. She now recognized with the particular stupidity of a young woman who believed that understanding a pattern meant she could break it, that because she saw the danger she was protected from it. She had not been protected from it. She had simply walked into it with her eyes open, which was in its way worse. On the third morning, a letter arrived, not from Nathaniel, from Thomas Carter Sr. She recognized the handwriting on the outside of the envelope. Angular, precise, the handwriting of a man who had strong opinions about penmanship as a character indicator. She had received one previous letter from Thomas Carter Sr. in the 3rd week of her marriage, welcoming her to the family in language so carefully calibrated to be technically warm while communicating nothing whatsoever, that she had reread it 3 times to make certain she had not missed something. She had not missed something. There had been nothing to miss. This letter was different. She opened it at the kitchen table, Hattie conspicuously present on the far side of the room, doing something that did not actually require her presence there, and she read it once quickly and then set it flat on the table and read it again slowly. Thomas Carter Sr. had the kind of legal mind that dressed every threat in the language of concern. The letter was 2 pages. It began by expressing his sincere hopes for her comfort and well-being. It proceeded in courteous and measured language through a summary of the legal position regarding the marriage documents, clearer and more detailed than Nathaniel's account had been, which she found interesting, and then it arrived in its 3rd paragraph at its actual purpose. He had become aware. Thomas wrote that Elizabeth had recently consulted Dr. Harlan Prentice in Millhaven. He wished to inquire in the spirit of family concern whether there was any matter pertaining to her health that the family ought to be made aware of in light of the ongoing procedural questions regarding the marriage. She read that paragraph twice. Then she folded the letter very deliberately along its original crease lines and set it back in its envelope and held it in both hands for a moment and breathed. He knew. Not everything. Not the specific word, not child, not pregnant, not heir. But he had found out about the doctor's visit, and Thomas Carter Sr. was not a man who inquired about anything without already suspecting the answer. He was not worried about her health. He was worried about what her health might mean for his plans. "Hattie," she said. How does Thomas Carter Sr. know I went to see Dr. Prentice?" A pause. "Small town," Hattie said carefully. "Millhaven's got maybe 400 people. A woman from Whitmore Hill rides in alone, visits the doctor, pays cash rides home alone. That's the kind of thing that gets noticed. And talked about, Hattie confirmed. Especially if somebody's already asking questions about her." Elizabeth looked at the envelope in her hands. "He had someone asking questions about me." "That man has had someone asking questions about everything for 40 years, Hattie said. "It's how he keeps winning." She did not respond to the letter that day. She thought about it carefully, the way her father had taught her to think about things that required precision from every angle in full, without rushing to the most satisfying response before she had considered all of them. Thomas Carter Sr. had 3 possible motivations for writing that letter. The first was that he genuinely did not know she was with child and was fishing for confirmation. The second was that he suspected it and wanted to pressure her into revealing it before she was ready, which would hand him the advantage of knowing her position before she was prepared to state it. The third, and this was the one she kept returning to, was that he knew or strongly suspected and was writing to give her an opportunity to either confirm it voluntarily, which he could then use, or deny it, which would be a lie he could later produce against her. None of these motivations suggested a man acting in anyone's interest but his own. She went to her writing desk in the late afternoon and composed a reply. She wrote, "Dear Mr. Carter, I thank you for your kind expressions of concern for my well-being. I am in good health and have no news to share at this time. Yours respectfully, Elizabeth Carter." Elizabeth. She read it back. It was accurate. It gave him nothing. It confirmed neither denial nor admission. It was, she thought, exactly the kind of letter her father would have written, not deceptive, but protective, which were not the same thing. She sealed it and gave it to Hattie to post. Then she sat for a long time at her writing desk, with her hands in her lap, and thought about the phrase she had used. No news to share at this time. At this time. The clock on her situation was not theoretical. It was biological, and it did not care about her plans, or her pride, or the architecture of her private decisions. In 2 months, perhaps 3, there would be news whether she shared it or not. The question was not whether Nathaniel would find out. The question was whether she would be the one to tell him on her own terms, for her own reasons, or whether Thomas Carter Sr. would find out first and weaponize it in whatever way served his purposes best. She understood now that she had less time than she had thought. And she understood something that had been forming slowly at the back of her mind since the morning she read the letter, sharpening itself into clarity the way cold air sharpens things. She needed to know what Nathaniel was actually thinking. Not what his uncle had decided. Not what the document said. Not what the solicitor had argued. What Nathaniel Carter himself, the man who had sat in her father's front room and said, "I don't know." in a voice that had followed her 3 miles down the road, what that man believed and wanted and was afraid of. She needed to go to the Laurel Inn. The decision arrived in her body, the way decisions sometimes did not, through deliberation, but through the sudden absence of resistance. She had been thinking around it for 2 days without acknowledging she was doing it, and now she was done thinking around it. She would go tomorrow morning. She did not sleep particularly well that night, either though for different reasons than before. The previous nights she had lain awake managing fear. This night she lay awake managing something she was more cautious about, naming something that felt like the edge of a thing she had been refusing to feel since February. Something that had been provoked against her best intentions by, I don't know, by the possibility, small guarded. She held it at arm's length and examined it skeptically, that there was something in Nathaniel Carter still worth the cost of finding out. She pressed it down. She was practical by nature and by necessity, and hope was the least practical emotion she knew of. She had learned that from her mother too. She slept eventually lightly and dreamed of nothing she remembered. She rode into Mill Haven the next morning on her gray mare, alone in the plain blue dress she wore for practical errands. She had told Hattie only that she was going into town, and Hattie had said nothing, which meant Hattie understood everything and approved of none of it and had made peace with both. The Laurel Inn sat at the main intersection of Mill Haven's 2 principal streets, a respectable establishment, the kind of place that men with money used when they wanted to conduct business without staying in anyone's home and incurring obligation. She had been inside it twice before, once for a town meeting in the public room, and once to deliver a message for her father. She tied her mare at the post outside and went in. The innkeeper, a broad, cautious man named Garland, looked up from the register with the expression of a man who was professionally neutral about everything. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Carter?" she said. "Is he in?" Garland's neutrality flickered once. "He's in the public room, ma'am. Shall I?" "I'll find him," she said. "Thank you." She walked through to the public room before Garland could raise any objection, or worse, announce her. Nathaniel was sitting at the far table near the window, alone with a cup of coffee and a newspaper he was not reading. She could tell he was not reading it from the door, from the way he was staring at the page without moving it. The way a person does when their eyes are pointed at something and their mind is pointed somewhere else entirely. He looked up when she came in. She watched the sequence of things that crossed his face in the first 2 seconds. Surprise, then something sharper and more complicated than surprise. Then the controlled settling back into composure that was as reflexive in him as breathing. She crossed the room and sat down across from him, without waiting to be invited, the way she had learned in the last several years that a woman who waits to be invited is a woman who is permanently waiting. "Elizabeth," he said. "Don't," she said. "Don't look at me like you don't know what I'm here about." He set the newspaper to one side. "All right. Your uncle wrote to me." The composure did not crack, but it shifted the smallest tightening around his eyes that she had learned over the better part of a year of marriage to read as the Carter version of alarm. "When?" he asked. "3 days ago. Delivered the morning after you came to Whitmore Hill." She folded her hands on the table between them. "He expressed concern for my health and made particular note of the fact that I had recently consulted Dr. Prentice." Nathaniel was quiet for one breath. "2. Then, I did not tell him that." "I know you didn't," she said. "You didn't know about it yourself, which means your uncle had someone watching me, Nathaniel. Someone who noticed my visit to the doctor and reported it back." She looked at him steadily. "That is the man whose advice you have been following." Something moved through his face, not anger, not yet, but something below anger, something foundational being tested. "What did his letter say specifically?" Nathaniel asked. "That he wished to know in the spirit of family concern whether there was any matter pertaining to my health that the family ought to be made aware of, given the procedural questions surrounding our marriage." She said it cleanly from memory, the precise language lodged in her mind like a splinter. It was very carefully worded. "He is a careful man." "He is," Nathaniel said. It came out flat. "He suspects something," she said. "I do not know exactly what he suspects, But the letter was not written by a man who is asking a genuine question. It was written by a man who believes he already knows the answer and wants to see if I will confirm it. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. What did you tell him? I told him I was in good health and had no news to share at this time. That is all. That is all. He sat back. He picked up his coffee cup and set it down again without drinking from it. He will not leave it at that. I know he won't, Elizabeth said, which is why I am here and why I am going to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer me the same way. He met her eyes. Go ahead. Did you know your uncle was having me watched? No, he said. And then, after a pause, with the deliberateness of a man carefully distinguishing between versions of the truth, I knew he was interested in the outcome of the marriage proceedings. I did not know he had taken steps to monitor the situation independently. You knew he was interested, she repeated. But you did not ask what that interest looked like in practice. He absorbed that. No, he said. I didn't. That is a choice, Nathaniel. Choosing not to ask a question because you do not want to know the answer is still a choice. I understand that, he said quietly. Good. She held his gaze. Then understand this as well. Whatever your uncle is planning, whatever he believes he has found or suspects he is about to find, it is going to happen faster now. This situation has a timeline that is not entirely under my control anymore, and I will not allow myself to be managed by a man who had someone watching my movements without my knowledge. Nathaniel set both hands flat on the table. What are you saying? I'm saying, she said, that if there are decisions to be made about this marriage, they need to be made by the people who are actually in it. Not by your uncle, not by a solicitor, not by a document that exploits a procedural error. She looked at him directly, unflinching. I am saying that you need to decide what you actually want, Nathaniel, and you need to decide it before your uncle decides it for you. The public room was quiet around them. A fire in the corner. Though it was summer, the mornings were still cool in the valley. Two men at the far end of the bar who had noticed nothing or pretended to notice nothing, which in a town of 400 was essentially the same social performance. Nathaniel looked at her for a long time. There is something you're not telling me, he said. It was not a question. It landed with a quiet precision that told her he had been circling that suspicion for some time, that he had been sitting in this public room with an unread newspaper and a cooling cup of coffee, and something she had said or not said had been working at him without resolution. Elizabeth did not answer immediately. She looked at her hands on the table. She thought about the decision she had made on the walk home from Dr. Prentice's office. She thought about her mother's grave and the promise she had made at 16. She thought about Thomas Carter Sr.'s letter with its careful language and its careful absence of the one word it was actually about. She thought about, I don't know, still following her 4 days later, still not resolved. Yes, she said finally. There is. The words cost her something. She felt the cost of them, the particular expenditure of letting a wall down by an inch, not a foot, not all the way, just enough to tell the truth about the truth. Nathaniel's jaw was tight. His hands were still on the table. He did not reach for her, and he did not look away. Are you going to tell me? He asked. Not today, she said. Elizabeth, not today. Her voice was steady and completely final, in the way she had learned to be final, not loud, not hard, but so clear that there was simply no room inside it for argument. There are things I need to understand first about where you stand. Genuinely. Not about what your uncle wants, or what the document says, or what Charlotte Hamilton's family expects. Where you stand. He breathed, once slowly. And how do I prove that to you? I don't know yet, she said honestly. But I will know it when I see it. She stood up from the table. She smoothed the front of her blue dress. She looked at him one more time, this man she had married in good faith, who had left in February, who had come back with legal papers, who had said, I don't know, and meant it enough that she had come 3 miles in the morning heat to say the things she had just said. Your uncle's letter arrives before you do, she said. That tells me everything about how this has been managed. Start managing it differently, Nathaniel, or there will be nothing left to manage. She walked out of the public room through the inn, past Garland at the register, who noticed everything and said nothing, and out into the summer morning. She was halfway home when she heard hooves behind her. She did not stop the mare. She kept her pace steady, and she kept her eyes on the road ahead, and she waited. He came up alongside her on the bay horse. He had not saddled properly. She could see he had come out in too much haste for full preparation and matched her pace without pulling ahead or dropping behind. "I sent him away," Nathaniel said. She looked at him. "Excuse me, last night. After the first day after I left Whitmore Hill, I wrote to my uncle. I told him I was handling the matter myself and I did not require further involvement." He was looking ahead at the road, not at her, in the way men sometimes delivered the most important things they had to say, sideways to the air, as if direct delivery was too much to manage. "I told him the solicitor was dismissed, that I would not be proceeding with the dissolution under his timeline." She let the silence hold for a moment. "You wrote to him 3 days ago?" "Yes." "Before you knew about his letter to me?" "Yes." She held that. She turned it over once, twice. She thought about what it meant and what it didn't mean, and made herself be careful about the difference. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for a few strides. The road moved under them. The summer birds carried on in the trees alongside. "Because sitting in that room with you," he said finally, "made me realize I had let other people define what was happening between us. And I had been calling it practicality or reason or doing the right thing. But it wasn't any of those." A pause. "It was cowardice." The word came out plain and unadorned the way honest men say the things they have had to work up to saying. Elizabeth recognized it for what it was, not a performance of contrition, but the actual thing. She did not say anything for a moment. "Your uncle is going to push harder when he gets that letter," she said. "I know. He will not simply accept being dismissed." "I know that too. And Charlotte Hamilton's family will be disappointed," Nathaniel said. "And we'll find another arrangement. They have several daughters and considerable property, and they will manage perfectly well without this particular connection." Elizabeth looked at him, then at the side of his face, the set of his jaw, the particular quality of resolve that she had seen before in him, on the 2 or 3 occasions when he had decided something fully and without reservation. It looked different from his caution, quieter and more absolute. "This does not resolve everything," she said. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. There are things I have not told you, things that will change the shape of this." "I understand that." "You don't," she said. "Not yet, but you will." He looked at her then directly, fully, the way he had not looked at her in the public room or at Whitmore Hill, the way she realized he had not looked at her in considerably longer than February. "Then let me," he said. "When you're ready, let me." She held his gaze for 2 full heartbeats. Then she looked back at the road. They rode the rest of the way in silence. Not the silence of the morning after his arrival, which had been heavy with everything unspoken, but a different kind. The kind that doesn't need to be filled, because the people inside it have already said the hardest thing and are still improbably riding in the same direction. Thomas Carter Sr.'s letter was in her pocket. His nephew was 6 feet to her left. And somewhere between those 2 facts was a decision that Elizabeth had not yet made, that she was not yet ready to make, but that she could feel for the first time, beginning to feel possible. She pressed her hand briefly against her side, not her stomach, just her side where the letter was folded against her ribs, and breathed the summer morning air. The clock was still running, but she was no longer running from it. They did not speak of the letter again that day. Nathaniel rode back to the Laurel Inn after they reached the fork in the road. He had not presumed to follow her all the way to Whitmore Hill, which she noted and filed away as evidence of something, though she was not yet sure what. He had tipped his hat at the fork, a small gesture old-fashioned and deliberate, and she had nodded once and kept riding, and neither of them had made any promises about what came next. That was the part that stayed with her through the afternoon. Not what he had said. What he hadn't said. He had not asked her again what she was hiding. He had ridden alongside her for 3 miles close enough that she could hear his horse breathing, and he had not pushed. He had told her what he had done, the letter to his uncle, the dismissal of the solicitor, and then he had let the silence be what it was. A man who wanted leverage would have pressed. A man performing contrition would have over-explained. Nathaniel had done neither. She did not know what to do with that yet. She unsaddled the gray mare herself when she got home, working the buckles with hands that were steadier than her thoughts, and she put the horse up, and she went inside, and she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold water, and she thought. She thought for a long time. Hattie came in from the garden with her apron full of green beans and took one look at Elizabeth's face and said, "He followed you." "He rode alongside me," Elizabeth said. "There is a difference." "What kind?" "The kind where a man follows a woman is one thing. The kind where a man rides alongside her because she has not told him to leave is another." She turned the cup in her hands. He dismissed the solicitor. Hattie sat down across from her with the apron still full and looked at her steadily. Before or after he found out about his uncle's letter? Before. Hattie was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know," Elizabeth said. "That's not nothing, Miss Eliza." "I know that too." She set the cup down. "It's also not enough. Not yet." Hattie started sorting the beans with the methodical patience of a woman who understood that some problems could not be fixed, and some could, and the wisdom was in knowing which was which. "How much time you got before it becomes not enough that matters?" Elizabeth pressed her lips together. "Less than I thought. Thomas Carter Sr. knows about the doctor visit. He suspects something. He will keep pushing until he finds out exactly what. And when he finds out, he will use it," Elizabeth said simply. "He will frame it however serves him best, either as proof that I was trying to trap his nephew or as leverage to pressure Nathaniel back into the family's plan. Possibly both." She looked at her hands on the table. "He is a man who understands that information is only useful if you control who has it and when." "Then you need to tell Nathaniel first," Hattie said. Not as a suggestion. As a plain statement of fact, the way Hattie stated most plain facts without cruelty and without softening. "I know," Elizabeth said, "before Thomas Carter Sr. gets there." "I know, Hattie." A pause. The beans continued sorting. "You scared?" Elizabeth considered the question honestly, which was the only way she ever considered anything. "Yes," she said. "I am afraid that when I tell him he will stay for the wrong reasons. I am afraid that if he stays for the wrong reasons, I will know it, and I will spend the rest of my life knowing it." She looked up. "I would rather be alone than be kept. I have always known that about myself." "I know you have," Hattie said quietly. "But I am also—" She stopped, started again. "I am also afraid that I have been so determined not to be kept that I have been using it as a reason not to let anyone choose me at all." The kitchen went very still. Hattie set down the last handful of beans. "Well," she said after a moment, "that right there is the most honest thing you have said in 3 months." Elizabeth almost laughed. Almost. "Don't make it a triumph, Hattie." "Wasn't planning to," Hattie said, and picked the beans back up. She sent a note to the Laurel Inn that evening. 4 sentences. She asked Nathaniel to come to Whitmore Hill the following morning. She said she had something to tell him. She said she would prefer to tell him privately at the house without the public room audience, and without his uncle's shadow over either of them. She signed it with her full name, Elizabeth Carter, for the first time in months. She gave the note to Hattie's nephew to carry, paid him 2 coins, and went to bed. She slept improbably deeply and without dreams. He arrived at 8 o'clock the following morning. She heard the carriage on the gravel, a single horse this time, not the 2 from his first arrival, which meant he had come in the smaller rig, which meant he had not come with any apparatus of formality. Another thing she filed away. She opened the door before he knocked again, the same as before, but this time the quality of it was different. This time she was not bracing herself. She was simply opening the door. I was dressed plainly. No good coat despite the heat. He had his hat in his hand again, but he held it differently, not like a prop, more like something he didn't know what to do with. He looked like a man who had not slept particularly well. "Come in," she said. He came in. Hattie was conspicuously absent. Elizabeth had asked her to spend the morning with her sister in the village, a request Hattie had accepted without comment, which was its own form of grace. They sat in the front room. The same chairs as before. The same table, though this time there was no document on it. Just a small pitcher of water and 2 glasses, because it was already warm and she was practical. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for the note," he said. Then after a beat, "I wasn't sure you would send one." "Neither was I," she admitted. That surprised him. She could see it, the slight shift, the recalibration. He had been expecting her to be more composed than this, more armored. She had decided in the night that armor was exactly the wrong choice for this particular conversation. "Nathaniel," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything. Not just the beginning of it, all of it." "All right," he said. "I am going to tell you the truth, and the truth is complicated, and parts of it are going to be hard to hear. I need you to trust that I am telling you all of it, not the version of it that makes me look most reasonable or that positions me most favorably." She looked at him. "Can you give me that?" "Yes," he said. And she believed him. She took one breath. "I am with child," she said. The silence that came after was the longest silence she had ever sat inside. It was not a stunned silence, not the blank, airless shock of something completely unexpected. It was the silence of a man who had suspected something and is now confronting the reality of what suspecting something and actually knowing it are 2 entirely different experiences. Nathaniel did not move. He did not look away from her. He sat with both hands on his knees, and he looked at her, and whatever was happening inside him was happening entirely in the place below the surface, in the part of Nathaniel Carter that had always been the most real and the most inaccessible. "How long?" he asked. His voice came out careful and low. 9 days ago, Dr. Prentice confirmed it. She kept her voice even. "I believe I am perhaps 7 or 8 weeks along based on what he told me. Early, but certain." He absorbed that. She could see him doing the arithmetic, the dates, the timing, the months. February when he left. Before February. The math worked the way math does, without sentiment or mercy. "You knew," he said slowly, "when I came with the papers." "Yes." "You knew the entire time I was here." "Yes." He exhaled. It was the most uncontrolled thing she had ever heard from him, a single breath that carried something enormous in it. Something she could not name precisely, but recognized as the sound of a man's carefully constructed understanding of a situation completely restructuring itself. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. And here was the part she had rehearsed. Not to make it smooth, she had not rehearsed it to smooth it, but to make it accurate. To say it in a way that was true, rather than defensive or strategic. Because, she said, "I knew what you would do." He looked at her. "I knew you would stay," she said. "I knew the moment I told you you would close that satchel and put the document away and tell me we would work it out and you would mean it. Nathaniel, I want to be clear that I believe you would mean it in that moment. But I also knew that 3 months from now, or 6 or a year, you would look at me and you would see the woman who told you about the child at the exact moment you were trying to leave, and you would wonder. You would wonder whether you stayed because you wanted to stay, or because I made it impossible for you to do anything else." She held his gaze. "I will not be the woman who trapped you. Not even accidentally. Not even with a truth." His jaw worked. Something was moving through him. She could see it in his hands, which had tightened on his knees, and in the way he was breathing slower than before. Deliberate the way he breathed when something had hit him hard, and he was managing not to let it show. "That is—" He stopped. "What?" she said. "That is the most." He stopped again. Pressed one hand over his mouth briefly, then dropped it. "Elizabeth, you were sitting here carrying my child, listening to me tell you about procedural deficiencies and yearly allowances and Charlotte Hamilton." "Yes," she said simply. "And you said nothing." "I said quite a lot," she said. "I just didn't say that." Something in his face broke open. Not dramatically, not completely, but in the way old wood breaks along a grain that was always there, that had always been the weak point, finally given enough pressure to give. "I accused you," he said. I sat in this room, and I handed you a document, and I told you my uncle had arranged a comfortable future for you. You did. While you were... He couldn't finish it. Yes, she said quietly without cruelty. While I was. He stood up. Not in anger, she could read his anger when it came, and this was not that. He stood up because he could not hold what he was feeling, and stay sitting, and he crossed to the window, the same way she had crossed to the window 4 days ago, and he stood with his back to her for a moment. She let him. She had given him a hard truth, and she owed him the time to hold it. You still could have told me, he said to the window. Yes, she said. I could have. It would have changed everything. I know. Then why? He turned back to face her. Elizabeth, if you knew it would change everything, why didn't you use it? Any other woman in this county would have used it. My uncle certainly expected you to use it, which is why he was so determined to find out about the doctor before you could. He looked at her across the room with something in his face that she had not seen before. Not admiration exactly, not yet, but the precursor to it, the raw material from which admiration is made. Why didn't you? Because I have watched women spend their whole lives being kept, she said. Kept in marriages, kept in houses, kept in situations that were never their choice by information or obligation, or the simple fact that they had no alternative. My mother was kept. Several of my cousins are kept. She held his gaze. I would rather raise this child alone with the house and my father's books and Hattie's company than raise them inside a marriage where every time you look at me, you are wondering what your life might have been. He crossed back from the window. He did not sit. He stood near the table close enough that she had to tilt her face up slightly to hold his eyes, and he looked at her for a long time in the direct, full way that she had seen from him so rarely and valued so highly. I need you to hear something, he said. I'm listening. I came here 5 days ago with that document, he said. And I sat in this room and I told you about the procedural deficiency and the yearly allowance and Charlotte Hamilton, and I meant every word of it at the time. I had convinced myself it was the right thing, the kind thing. He paused. And you sat across from me, and you did not cry, and you did not beg, and you did not use what you knew to stop me. And I have spent 5 days thinking about why that was the most disturbing thing that has ever happened to me. She tilted her head slightly. Disturbing. Because it meant, he said, that you had already made peace with losing this marriage. That you valued your own dignity more than you valued keeping me. He looked at her steadily. That is not something a woman does if she was ever trying to trap someone. The word hung in the air between them. Trap, the word that had lived under everything. The accusation that had never been made aloud, but had been present in every legal letter, every solicitor's notation, every line of Thomas Carter Sr.'s careful prose. Your uncle believes differently, she said. My uncle is wrong, Nathaniel said. Flat, absolute. No qualification around it. My uncle has spent 40 years believing that every woman who marries into money has a scheme because that is the only framework he has for understanding why a woman would want anything at all. His voice had an edge now, not anger at her, but the contained, pressurized anger of a man who has understood something about himself that he did not enjoy understanding. And I have been letting him frame this situation. I have been letting him frame you. And that is inexcusable, Elizabeth, and I am not going to dress it up as anything less than that. She looked at him for a long moment. Nathaniel, she said carefully, I need you to hear something now. All right, this child is real, she said, and the fact that I am telling you does not obligate you. I want to be very clear about that. I am telling you because you had a right to know, and because Thomas Carter Sr. was closing in on the truth, and I would not allow him to be the one who told you. She kept her voice steady and precise. But I am not telling you so that you will stay. I am telling you so that you can make a real choice with all of the information for the first time in this entire situation. He looked at her for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, And if I choose to stay, then you choose to stay knowing I will never let you manage me, she said. Knowing I will call things what they are, including when you are wrong. Knowing that I will not be a quiet wife who asks nothing and expects nothing and is grateful for whatever form of attention she receives. A pause. knowing that I am, as your uncle has probably told you on multiple occasions, considerably more trouble than Charlotte Hamilton would ever be. Something crossed his face, quick involuntary gone before she could fully read it. He has said something very much like that, Nathaniel said, several times. And, he said, I have been starting to think that trouble as my uncle defines it might be precisely what I should have been looking for. She had not expected to feel what she felt in that moment. She had expected continued wariness. She had expected the careful, guarded management of possibility that she had been practicing since February. She was good at that management. She had built it deliberately out of her mother's lesson and her own clear-eyed understanding of her situation, and she had reinforced it every morning when she woke up and counted what she had. What she felt instead was something that had been pressed down so long and so thoroughly that she had nearly forgotten it was still there, a single dangerous, entirely unwelcome flicker of belief. Not certainty. She was too honest for certainty yet. But something. Enough something that she looked away from him toward the window, because she needed a moment's privacy from his very direct gaze. There is still your uncle, she said to the window. He will not accept the dismissal easily. No, Nathaniel agreed. He won't. And when he finds out about the child, and he will find out if he doesn't already suspect, he will try to use it. Either to pressure me into signing something that limits the child's claim, or to pressure you back into his plan by framing the pregnancy as a complication rather than a... She stopped. Rather than a what? Nathaniel said. She turned back to face him. Rather than a child, she said simply. Your child, who is already real and already here, and is not a legal complication, or a strategic problem, or a procedural issue. His jaw was tight. I understand that. I need you to keep understanding it when your uncle is in the room, she said. He is very good at making people forget what matters. He reframes things, and he does it so smoothly that you are agreeing with the new frame before you have noticed the original one has been discarded. I know how he works, Nathaniel said. Then know it loudly, she said, in front of him. That is the part that matters. He stayed for 2 hours. They talked, really talked the way they had not talked in the better part of a year, the way she had thought perhaps they had never quite managed. The way that requires both people to be genuinely present, rather than performing their version of the conversation. He told her things about the previous winter. She had not known about the pressure from his uncle that had intensified after the new year. About the Charlotte Hamilton arrangement that had been presented to him not as a suggestion, but as a fait accompli about the way he had handled it, by retreating into work and distance and letters about fence repairs, because he did not know what the right thing was, and he had been a coward about not knowing. He said the word again, coward. She noted that he did not flinch from it the second time. She told him things in return. About the walk home from Dr. Prentice's office. About the decision she had made on that walk and why she had made it. About her mother and the stone inside the peach and the promise she had made at 16. She had not told those things to anyone since her father, and she told them carefully, not as a gift exactly, but as a form of honesty, the kind you offer when you have decided that someone has provisionally earned it. When he finally stood to leave, the summer morning had become summer midday, and the light through the windows had shifted. At the door he stopped. I am going to write to my uncle today, he said. Not the way I wrote before. This time I am going to tell him specifically, and without diplomatic hedging, what I have decided and why. And what have you decided? She asked. That he does not get to decide this, Nathaniel said. Not the marriage, not the child, not you. He held her gaze. That is mine to decide, and I have decided. She looked at him for a moment. You have decided, she said carefully, in the last 2 hours after information that changes everything. Yes. That is very fast. I know. I need you to be sure, she said. Not performing sure, actually sure, because what comes next is going to be hard. Nathaniel, your uncle is not a man who accepts being overruled quietly. There will be pressure, and there will be legal maneuvering, and there will be things said about me in rooms I am not in, and you will need to hold your position, not when it is easy, but when it is not. I know that, he said. I need you to know it in your body, she said, not just in your head. He looked at her, that direct, full look, and then he did something she had not seen him do in the year of their acquaintance and the months of their marriage. He reached out and took her hand. Not in any dramatic gesture, not with any theatrical weight to it, just took his hand over hers and held it for a moment. "I know it," he said. "In my body." She looked at their hands, then at his face. "All right," she said finally. Not surrender, not capitulation, just all right. The beginning of something that might, if handled carefully and without illusion, become what it was supposed to be. He released her hand. He put his hat on. And then the sound of a second carriage came up the drive. Not the one Nathaniel had arrived in. A larger one. She could hear it, heavier wheels, 2 horses, the kind of equipage that announced its own importance. Nathaniel heard it too. She watched the recognition move through his face, sharp and immediate, the way you recognize something you were half expecting and fully dreading. "He didn't wait for the letter," Nathaniel said. Thomas Carter Sr. had come himself. She did not step back from the door. She stood beside Nathaniel on the front steps of Whitmore Hill, beside him, not behind him, and she watched the carriage roll to a stop on the gravel drive. She watched Thomas Carter Sr. climb out with the assistance of his driver, straightening to his full height, settling his coat, collecting his cane. He was a tall man, older than she sometimes remembered him being, with the kind of face that had been handsome at 30 and become formidable at 60, all planes and angles, and the particular confidence of a man who had never had a reason to be uncertain about anything. He looked at Nathaniel. He looked at Elizabeth. He looked at the way they were standing beside each other on her front steps, with the door open behind them, and she watched him read the situation with the speed and precision of a man who read situations for a living. "Nathaniel," he said. "Uncle," Nathaniel said. "I received your letter," Thomas said. He was still looking at Elizabeth as he said it, not at Nathaniel, which told her everything she needed to know about who he considered the real problem in this equation. "Then you know what I've decided," Nathaniel said. "I know what you wrote," Thomas said. He climbed the first step. "That is not always the same thing." He stopped when Nathaniel did not move aside, which Elizabeth noted with a feeling she was not going to name, yet Nathaniel did not. "It is in this case," Nathaniel said. Thomas Carter Sr. looked at his nephew for a long moment. Then he looked at Elizabeth directly, fully, without any of the courteous indirection of his letter. And he said with the precision of a man who has chosen his timing to the second, "I know about the child." The words fell into the morning like stones into still water. Elizabeth did not move. She did not flinch. She held Thomas Carter Sr.'s gaze the way she had learned to hold difficult things steadily, without giving them the satisfaction of watching her absorb the impact. "Then you know more than I knew a week ago," she said calmly. "And you found it out by having someone watch my movements without my knowledge or consent." She tilted her head slightly. "I wonder, Mr. Carter, whether Nathaniel's solicitor would find that detail as interesting as I do." A silence. Thomas Carter Sr.'s expression did not change. He was too practiced for that, but something shifted in it. A recalculation. A reassessment of what he was dealing with. "Elizabeth," Nathaniel said quietly beside her. Not a warning. Something else. Something closer to, she almost smiled admiration. "You are clever," Thomas said to her. Not unkindly. The way a chess player acknowledges a good move. "I am my father's daughter," she said. He was a pastor, but he was also a man who read the law for pleasure. He believed in knowing your rights, Mr. Carter, and knowing when they have been violated. Thomas looked at Nathaniel. "You should have told me," he said, "about all of it." "I'm telling you now," Nathaniel said. "We are keeping the marriage. Elizabeth is carrying my child. The dissolution proceedings are over." He paused. "And whatever arrangement you made with the Hamilton family, I trust you will unmake it with the same efficiency." Thomas Carter Sr. looked at his nephew for a long assessing moment. Then he looked at Elizabeth again. "You have your father's eyes," he said finally. James Whitmore was also a man who was considerably more trouble than he appeared. "I will take that as a compliment," Elizabeth said. "It was intended as one," Thomas said. And then, in the single most surprising thing he had done in her experience of him, he inclined his head slightly in the direction of something that was not quite respect, but was its immediate neighbor. He climbed back down the step. He turned toward his carriage. He stopped once with his back to them and said to the heir, or to his driver, or to no one in particular, "The child will carry the Carter name. That is all that concerns me." And he walked to the carriage and got in, and the driver turned the horses, and they went back down the gravel drive without looking back. Elizabeth and Nathaniel stood on the front steps and watched him go. When the carriage was out of sight, Nathaniel let out a breath. "That is not over," he said. "No," she agreed. "It isn't. He will push again, from another direction." "He will," she said. "He is a man who plays the long game, and he has just lost the opening." She turned to look at him. "But he also just told us something." "What?" "He said the child will carry the Carter name. He did not say the marriage was a mistake." She held his gaze. "Thomas Carter Sr. concedes nothing he does not have to concede. If he walked away without a legal threat or a new offer, it is because he has recalculated and decided that this outcome is acceptable." She paused. "Not preferred. Acceptable." Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. "You read him very quickly." "I read people very quickly," she said. "It is one of the things about me that your uncle finds troublesome." She looked back at the empty road. "It is also, I suspect, one of the things that will eventually make him respect me. Not today, but eventually." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Elizabeth," he said. She looked at him. "I am sorry," he said, "for the letter about the fence, for the months of silence, for coming here with legal papers instead of coming here with the conversation we should have had in February." He said it plainly without performance. "I am sorry for all of it." She looked at him, at this man standing on her father's front steps in the July heat. Hatless. Now, no satchel, no document. Nothing between them except the truth. They had both just told, and the truth that Thomas Carter Sr.'s carriage had just driven away with whether he liked it or not. "I know," she said, "and I will accept that apology when I am ready." "That is fair," he said. "It is not quite fair," she said, "but it is honest. And honest is what we have right now." He almost smiled. Just the edge of it at the corner of his mouth, the expression she had catalogued early in their acquaintance as the one that meant he was genuinely, unexpectedly pleased by something. "Honest is enough," he said. "It will have to be," she said, and turned back to the house, leaving the door open behind her. He followed. He had not been invited precisely, but the door was open, and sometimes that is enough. Thomas Carter Sr.'s carriage had been gone less than an hour when Nathaniel found the second letter. Not a letter sent to Elizabeth. A letter he himself had written, or rather, a letter that had been written in his name. He discovered it by accident, the way most devastating things are discovered. He had gone back to the Laurel Inn to collect his things, intending to move them to Whitmore Hill. If Elizabeth would permit it. They had not discussed it explicitly, but the open door had felt like permission of a kind, provisional and conditional, and requiring careful handling, but permission nonetheless. He had gone to his room, opened the satchel to check its contents before packing, and found tucked beneath the dissolution document he had never presented for signing a folded sheet of paper he had not put there. He recognized his uncle's handwriting immediately. He recognized something else almost as quickly. The document was dated 3 weeks ago, before he had come to Virginia, before he had ridden 3 days to Whitmore Hill with a satchel full of legal arguments and the best intentions a coward could manufacture. It was a letter to Charlotte Hamilton's father, written in Nathaniel's name, signed with a signature that was close enough to his own that a man not looking carefully would not have caught the difference. In it, Nathaniel, or rather, Thomas Carter Sr., using Nathaniel's name and voice, confirmed his intention to dissolve the marriage to Elizabeth Whitmore, and expressed his sincere anticipation of the union with Miss Charlotte Hamilton at the earliest opportunity. It referenced specific financial arrangements. It referenced a timeline. It was in every material detail a binding social commitment made on his behalf without his knowledge. Nathaniel sat on the edge of the bed in the Laurel Inn and read it twice. Then he folded it very carefully, put it in his coat pocket, and sat still for a moment with his hands on his knees. His uncle had not sent him to Virginia to dissolve a marriage. His uncle had sent him to Virginia to make the dissolution a formality, because the commitment to Charlotte Hamilton had already been made. In his name, without his consent. And Thomas Carter Sr. had put the forged letter in this satchel so that if Nathaniel found it, it would look like something Nathaniel himself had forgotten writing, or like something that had been filed for reference, not like what it actually was. Evidence of a man who had decided his nephew's life for him, and then maneuvered the situation so carefully that Nathaniel would arrive at the predetermined conclusion, believing it was his own. He stood up. He put on his coat. He picked up the satchel. He rode back to Whitmore Hill at a pace that was not quite a gallop, but was everything that a controlled man allows himself instead of one. Elizabeth heard him on the drive before Hattie did. She had been listening without admitting she was listening for the sound of wheels or hooves returning, though she would not have said why exactly. Not in any way she was willing to examine directly. She came to the front room when she heard him on the steps and opened the door before he knocked and took one look at his face. "What happened?" she said. He came inside. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out the folded letter and held it out to her without a word. She took it. She read it. She read it again. When she looked up, her face was composed in the particular way that meant she was managing something large. "He signed your name," she said. "Close enough that Hamilton's family would not question it," Nathaniel said. "Close enough that I might not have questioned it myself if I had not been looking for the difference." His voice was level and precise, and entirely devoid of the heat she could hear pressing against the underside of it. "He committed me to a second marriage before the first one was dissolved. He wrote this 3 weeks ago, before I came here. While I was still in Richmond, believing I was making my own decision about what to do." "You were never making your own decision," Elizabeth said. "No," he said. "I wasn't." She set the letter on the table between them. She looked at it for a moment, at the handwriting, at the careful approximation of Nathaniel's signature at the bottom, and she felt something she had not expected to feel, which was fury. Not for herself. She had been angry on her own behalf for months and had metabolized it into something useful. This was fury on his behalf, clean and hot, and entirely different in character. "He put this in your satchel," she said. "Yes, so that you would find it and believe you had written it. Or so that if I found it after the dissolution was complete, it would serve as a reminder that the next step had already been arranged." He looked at her directly. Either way, it was there, so I would move in the direction he had already decided on. She was quiet for a moment. "Nathaniel, how long has he been doing this?" The question landed differently than she had intended. She saw it in his face the way it hit something further down than the immediate situation, something older. "Since my father died," he said. It came out quieter than the rest. "I was 22. My uncle stepped in, and he was useful. He was knowledgeable and experienced, and he had strong opinions about what should happen with the estate and with me. And I was 22, and I had just lost my father, and I let him." He looked at the letter on the table. "I kept letting him. Because it was easier than the alternative, and because he was always technically right, and because I had told myself that deferring to his judgment was wisdom rather than cowardice," Elizabeth said. Not unkindly, just precisely. "Yes," he said. Again. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" "I am going to go to Richmond," he said. "I am going to speak to a solicitor of my own choosing, not my uncle's, not the family's, mine. And I am going to have this letter examined, and I am going to understand exactly what legal exposure exists for me and for Hamilton's family." He paused. "And then I am going to have a conversation with my uncle that is not going to be comfortable for either of us." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." "I need you to know something before I go," he said. She waited. "I am not going to Richmond because of the child," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I am going because my uncle forged my name to a document and placed me in a legal and social position. I did not choose, and that is not something I am willing to permit, regardless of—" He stopped, chose the next words carefully. "Regardless of anything else. This is about who I am and what I will accept in my own life." He looked at her. The child is a separate thing, a true thing, but it is not the reason I am doing this." She held his gaze. She believed him. She believed him because she had learned over the months of this marriage to read the difference between Nathaniel performing conviction and Nathaniel possessing it, and this was possession. Clear and absolute and not new. It was the conviction of a man who had been working his way toward it for some time and had finally arrived. "How long will you be in Richmond?" she asked. "A week, perhaps 10 days. A pause. "I will write. Actual letters, Elizabeth. Not about fences." Something moved through her quick and warm and unwelcome in its warmth. The way hope always is when you have been carefully managing its absence. "See that you do," she said. He left the next morning. The week that followed was the strangest Elizabeth could remember. Stranger even than the weeks after her father's death. Stranger than the first weeks of the marriage. Stranger than the 9 days between Dr. Prentice's office and Nathaniel's arrival with the satchel. It was strange because for the first time in months, something was happening. Not happening to her, happening because of decisions that had been made deliberately by people exercising actual agency over their actual lives. The first letter arrived 4 days after he left. It was 3 pages. It told her about the solicitor, a man named Marsh, mid-40s, recommended by a judge of Nathaniel's acquaintance, entirely unconnected to the Carter family's network of legal relationships. It told her what Marsh had said about the forged letter, that the signature discrepancy was sufficient, combined with Nathaniel's testimony about not having written it, to constitute grounds for legal action against Thomas Carter Sr., if Nathaniel chose to pursue it. It told her that the Hamilton family had been contacted by Marsh formally on Nathaniel's behalf, and informed that the commitment represented in the letter had not been authorized and would not be honored. At the bottom of the 3rd page, in different handwriting than the careful legal summary above, looser, less deliberate. The handwriting of a man writing quickly, and from somewhere below, his usual composure, he had added, "I sat in Marsh's office this afternoon and read the forged letter again, and understood for the first time what my uncle actually thinks of me. Not what he says, what he thinks. He thinks I am a piece on a board that can be moved without consultation. I am 48 hours past being angry about it, and into something quieter that I do not entirely have words for yet. I thought you should know that I am all right. I am not all right the way I was performing all right in your front room. I mean, I am actually all right in the way that comes from having finally made a decision that is entirely my own. I will explain better when I return." N. Elizabeth read the postscript 4 times. Then she folded the letter and put it in her sewing basket inside the cloth pouch where she kept her coins, where no one would look for it. And she went back to the kitchen, and she was, for reasons she refused to entirely examine, something very close to calm. Hattie noticed, of course. "You're humming," she said 2 days after the letter arrived. "I am not," Elizabeth said. "You were humming 3 minutes ago over the bread." "I was thinking." "You were humming while thinking," Hattie said. "Which is different from just thinking. You haven't hummed since—" She stopped. "Since February," Elizabeth said. "Since before February," Hattie said, and went back to what she was doing with the satisfied expression of a woman who has observed something she considers conclusive. Elizabeth did not argue with her. The second letter arrived 6 days after the first. This one was shorter. It told her that the meeting with Thomas Carter Sr. had occurred, that it had been, as predicted, not comfortable for either of them, that Thomas had initially denied authorship of the forged letter, had actually looked Nathaniel in the eye and denied it, which Nathaniel wrote about with a flatness that told her more about the experience than any description of it would have. That when Marsh produced a comparison of the handwriting against documented samples of Thomas's correspondence, Thomas had stopped denying it and shifted without pause to explaining why it had been necessary. That word. Nathaniel had underlined it in the letter. Necessary. He had written. He used the word necessary as though that settled the matter. As though the necessity of an outcome, as he had determined, it justified the method. He looked genuinely confused that I did not agree. The letter continued. I told him that the estate and the family name were his concern, as long as I had allowed them to be, and that I was no longer allowing it. I told him that my marriage was my own, and my child was my own, and my signature was my own, and none of those things were available to be managed by him now or at any future point. He told me I was making a catastrophic error in judgment. I told him that if it was an error, it was mine to make. At the bottom, I am coming home Thursday. I recognize that Whitmore Hill is not yet home in any formal or agreed-upon sense. I am using the word anyway, because it is the most accurate one I have. N. She read the letter sitting at the kitchen table. She read it twice. She set it down. Hattie came in from the garden and looked at her face and put the kettle on without being asked. Thursday, Elizabeth said. That's tomorrow, Hattie said. I know when Thursday is, Hattie. Just making sure, Hattie said, and said nothing else. He arrived at mid-morning on Thursday with one saddlebag instead of a satchel, and the expression of a man who had done something genuinely difficult and was neither celebrating nor recovering from it, but simply carrying it the way you carry things that are true. She opened the door. He stood on the step. The solicitor believes the forged letter creates significant legal exposure for your uncle, she said, because they had been corresponding for 10 days, and pleasantries felt beside the point. Marsh's opinion is that Thomas will not push further. He said the same way, straight to it, no preamble. He has too much to lose if this goes public, and he knows it. And Charlotte Hamilton's family. Disappointed, managed. Her father is a reasonable man who was as disturbed as anyone by what Thomas had done in his name. He paused. He actually sent his regards to you, which surprised me. It shouldn't, she said. A man who discovers he was being used as a piece on someone else's board tends to feel a certain solidarity with others in the same position. He looked at her for a moment. You are very good at that, he said. At what? Understanding what people are actually feeling underneath what they say they are feeling. She considered that. I grew up watching two people who loved each other spend their whole marriage talking around what they actually felt, she said. It teaches you to read underneath. Your parents. Yes. He absorbed that. He had his hat in his hand again. He was looking at her with that direct quality she had catalogued early and valued highly, and had stopped pretending she did not value. Elizabeth, he said, I would like to come in. Not as a visitor. I understand that is a different thing from what has happened before, and I am not asking you to agree to all of it today. But I would like to stop staying at the Laurel Inn, and I would like to stop conducting this marriage through letters, and I would like... He stopped, steadied himself. I would like to try to be the person who should have been here in February. She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the saddlebag instead of the satchel. She looked at the hat in his hand and the absence of any document anywhere about his person. You can come in, she said. We will work out the rest as we go. That is fair, he said. It isn't entirely fair, she said, but it is what I have. He came in. The first week was careful, not cold careful. There was a difference, and both of them understood it without needing to say so. He took the guest room without being asked to, which was the right instinct. He sat at the kitchen table in the mornings with his coffee the way her father used to sit at the kitchen table reading or thinking, or simply being present in the household, in the uncomplicated way of a person who belongs there. He did not try to manage things. He did not offer opinions about how the estate was run, or what decisions Elizabeth had made in his absence. He helped Hattie carry water one morning when her back was troubling her, and Hattie received this assistance with the expression of a woman reserving judgment while privately revising it. He asked Elizabeth on the third evening if he could read to her. She looked up from her own book surprised. Read to me. Your father's books, he said. There's a volume of Jefferson's correspondence on the shelf I have been wanting to read for years. I thought if you were amenable that I might read it aloud. Company for both of us. She looked at him for a moment. Her father had read aloud to her mother every Sunday evening. It had been the one time of the week when the loneliness between them went quiet. All right, she said. He got the book. He sat in the chair across from her. He read in a voice that was quieter and less formal than his speaking voice, and she listened, and outside the summer evening cooled toward dark, and it was, she would not yet say easy, but it was uncomplicated. It was the kind of ordinary that she had not had enough of and had not known she missed until she had it. On the fourth day, Thomas Carter Sr. came again. She was in the kitchen garden when she heard the carriage, and she stood up straight and pressed the back of her hand to her forehead and looked toward the drive and felt the familiar gathering of herself that his presence required. Nathaniel came out of the house before she reached the front. He stood at the top of the steps, the same steps where Elizabeth had stood beside him the first time Thomas came, and he watched his uncle climb out of the carriage, and he did not move to greet him, and he did not look particularly alarmed. Thomas Carter Sr. climbed the steps and stopped when Nathaniel did not yield the doorway. "We should talk," Thomas said. "We should," Nathaniel said, "but not without Elizabeth." A pause. "This is family business." "She is my family," Nathaniel said. Flat, without inflection. The kind of sentence that does not leave room for reinterpretation. Thomas looked at him for a moment. Then he looked past him to where Elizabeth had appeared at the side of the house, still with garden soil on her hands, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her the first time, assessing thorough willing to be impressed against his prior intention. "Very well," he said. They went into the front room. The same front room. The same chairs, though no document on the table this time. Nothing on the table at all, except the small pitcher of water. Elizabeth had not cleared from breakfast. Thomas sat. Nathaniel sat beside Elizabeth, rather than across from her, which was not lost on anyone in the room, including Thomas. "The Hamilton matter is resolved," Thomas said, opening with it directly, which Elizabeth respected. "James Hamilton is not pursuing any legal claim. The arrangement is dissolved." He looked at Nathaniel. "You handled that reasonably well." "Marsh handled it," Nathaniel said. "I provided the facts." "Marsh is a competent man," Thomas allowed, which from him was the equivalent of high praise. He looked at his hands for a moment, then at Elizabeth. "You are how far along?" "Approximately 10 weeks, Elizabeth said. He nodded slowly. "The child will be born in winter." "January, Dr. Prentice believes," she said. Another silence. Thomas Carter Sr. in silence was not the same as most people in silence. There was a density to it, a working quality, the sound of a man computing variables. "I acted incorrectly," he said finally. Elizabeth kept very still. Nathaniel did the same beside her. "The letter," Thomas said. "What I wrote in Nathaniel's name. That was an overreach. He said the word, the way a man says a word, that costs him something not fluently, not with ease. I had determined what the correct outcome was, and I moved to secure it without adequately considering that the people most affected by it had not been consulted." He paused. "That is a pattern I have followed for some time. It has served the family's interests in certain respects. I am aware it has cost other things." Elizabeth looked at him for a moment. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "are you apologizing?" "I am acknowledging," he said. "Whether it rises to an apology is perhaps for you to decide." She considered that. It was, she thought, the most honest thing she had ever heard from him. "Then I will decide later," she said, "when I have had more time with it." Something shifted in Thomas Carter Sr.'s face, not softening exactly, but an adjustment. A small repositioning, the way a map is repositioned when you discover you have been slightly wrong about the territory. "The child will carry the Carter name," he said. "I meant that when I said it before. I mean it now with more context than I had then." He looked at Nathaniel. "I will not interfere in the management of Whitmore Hill. That was never my place, and I understand now that I was making it my place inappropriately." "Thank you," Nathaniel said. Thomas looked at Elizabeth. "Your father was a good man," he said. "James Whitmore had the most inconveniently thorough moral sense of anyone I ever argued with. I argued with him twice in my younger years about county matters. He was right both times." He picked up his hat from the table. "I see that quality has been inherited." He stood. He held out his hand to Nathaniel, who took it. He looked at Elizabeth and inclined his head in the gesture she had seen before, the one that lived in the neighborhood of respect, without yet being fully inside its borders. "I will come again," he said, "when the child is born." "You are welcome to," Elizabeth said. He left. The quiet that came after Thomas Carter Sr.'s carriage left the second time was entirely different from the quiet after the first. Elizabeth sat in the front room and did not say anything for a moment. Nathaniel sat beside her and also did not say anything, which was one of the things she had come to appreciate about him, that he had learned or was learning the difference between silence that needed filling and silence that needed keeping. "He will try again," she said finally. "Not the same way, but in other ways, smaller ones, he will always have an opinion about things." "I know," Nathaniel said. "You will have to keep saying no when no is the right answer, even when it is uncomfortable." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Do you?" "I have had 10 days of practice," he said. "I expect it will get easier." She almost smiled. Just the edge of it, the way hope shows when you are not quite ready to let it show fully. "It does get easier," she said. "Most hard things do, once you have decided to do them." He looked at her face, at the almost smile she had not entirely managed to suppress, and he said quietly, "When I left in February, I told myself I was doing it because staying would be worse for both of us. That was not the whole truth." She looked at him. "What was the rest of it?" "The rest of it," he said, "was that I had started to understand what I felt for you, and it frightened me, and leaving was easier than admitting it." The room went very still. She held that sentence. She turned it over once, twice. She made herself look at it clearly, and without the distortion of wanting it to mean more than it said. "Nathaniel," she said, "that is a very significant thing to say." "Yes," he said. "I am aware." "You should be certain you mean it." "I have been certain of very few things in this past year," he said. "But that I mean." He held her gaze. "I am not asking you to forgive everything today. I am not asking you to feel something you don't feel, or to pretend the last several months did not happen. I am asking you to let me prove it. Over time. With actions rather than just words." He paused. "I am asking for the chance to be the husband I should have been." She looked at him for a long time. Outside, the afternoon was moving toward evening, the summer light going golden and long. Somewhere in the kitchen, Hattie was making enough noise to communicate that she was very much minding her own business and not listening at all. "You are already here," Elizabeth said finally. "You came back. You went to Richmond. You stood in this room and told your uncle no, and you meant it." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "Those are actions, Nathaniel, not words." "Then let me keep making them," he said. She breathed, once slowly. "All right," she said. It was the same word she had said before, all right, but it sat differently in the air this time. Less provisional, less armored. He reached across the space between them and covered her hand with his, the same way he had on the front steps, simple and untheatrical and entirely sincere. She did not pull away. Outside, the mockingbird started up again. That same mockingbird she was almost certain that had been carrying on indifferently through every significant moment of the past 2 weeks. It was considerably more cheerful than the situation warranted, and she found to her own mild surprise that she did not mind. The mockingbird was still singing 3 months later when everything almost fell apart again. Not almost, it did fall apart. For approximately 6 hours on a Tuesday in October, the entire careful architecture that Elizabeth and Nathaniel had been building stone by stone through the heat of August and the cooling of September came down. Not dramatically, not with shouting or accusations or legal documents. It came down the way real things come down, quietly, in a conversation that started about one thing and turned out to be about everything else. But that was October. Before October, there was August and September, and those months mattered too. August was the month Nathaniel moved properly into Whitmore Hill. Not into the guest room, into the life of the house, into the daily fabric of it, the way a person moves into a place they have decided is theirs. He brought books from Carter Valley Estate, which he said he had been meaning to read, and which Elizabeth suspected he had selected specifically because they complemented her father's collection. He brought his writing things and established himself at the small desk in the study that had been her father's desk, which she noticed and did not comment on. Though she noticed him notice that she noticed, and neither of them spoke about it. How was she discovered a different person inside a house than he was in any formal or social context? The carefulness that read in public as reserve turned out to be something else entirely at the kitchen table at 7 in the morning. It was attention. He listened to things. He remembered things. He noticed on the third day that she held her left shoulder higher than her right when she was tense, and he did not say anything about it. But the following afternoon, she found that he had moved the chair in the study 3 inches to the left, bringing it in line with the window, which was apparently exactly the adjustment that had been making the light fall wrong on her reading. She had not mentioned the light. He had simply noticed and corrected it without announcement or credit-taking. She filed that away with the other things she was filing. Hattie stopped reserving judgment somewhere around the second week. Elizabeth knew this because Hattie began making 2 cups of coffee without being asked, which was Hattie's version of an official position statement. The letters from Thomas Carter Sr. arrived in August, 2 of them both regarding Carter Valley estate business, both addressed to Nathaniel and written in the formal, efficient prose of a man conducting ordinary affairs. Neither letter mentioned Elizabeth. Neither letter mentioned the child. Neither letter referenced July, or what had been said in the front room, or what had been acknowledged or surrendered. Nathaniel showed her both letters without being asked. "He is establishing a new pattern," Elizabeth said, reading the second one. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "He is telling me that we can have a workable relationship as long as certain things are not discussed. Is that acceptable to you?" He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. "For now," he said. "He is 62, and he is not going to change the fundamental way he sees the world. I am not going to change it for him. What I can do is maintain my own position clearly enough that he understands the boundaries and works within them." He paused. "He is not a bad man, Elizabeth. He is a man who believes that love is a luxury that families with responsibilities cannot afford. He is wrong, but he is not malicious. He forged your name," she said. "He forged my name because he believed he was protecting me from my own poor judgment," Nathaniel said. "That is a different kind of wrong than cruelty. It does not excuse it, but it is different." She looked at him. "You have been thinking about this for a while." "Since Richmond," he said. "Since I sat in Marsh's office and read the letter and felt the first anger pass and had to decide what came after it." He held her gaze. "I decided I did not want to spend the rest of my life angry at a man for loving me in the only way he knew how, even if that way was misguided and overreaching and occasionally involved forgery." She was quiet for a moment. "That is a very generous position." "It is a practical one," he said. "He is my family. You are my family. I would like those 2 facts to coexist without permanent warfare if it can be managed." She thought about her mother, about the stone inside the peach, about 2 people who loved each other and could not find the language for it. "It can be managed," she said, "but it requires both sides to actually want it." "I know," he said. "I am working on my side. His will take longer." September brought the first real argument. It was about Carter Valley Estate, which Nathaniel had been managing at a distance through correspondence with his steward, a capable man named Briggs, who sent weekly reports and asked occasional questions that required decisions. Nathaniel made those decisions at the desk in the study in the mornings before Elizabeth was fully awake, and she had not paid particular attention to what those decisions were until the morning she came in to retrieve a book and saw spread across the desk a letter from Briggs and Nathaniel's draft reply, and read enough of both to understand that Nathaniel was planning to lease the southern quarter of Carter Valley to a tobacco merchant from Richmond for a period of 5 years. She did not say anything immediately. She got her book. She went back to the kitchen and drank her coffee and thought about it. She thought about it for 2 hours. Then she went back to the study and she said, "The southern quarter of Carter Valley." Nathaniel looked up. "Yes. You are leasing it for 5 years to a Richmond merchant." "The offer is good," he said. "The rate is—" "I know the rate," she said. "I read the letter." She held his gaze. "I also know that the southern quarter has 2 tenant families who have been farming it for 11 and 14 years respectively. A 5-year lease to a tobacco merchant means those families need to find new arrangements." She paused. "Did you consider that?" He was quiet for a moment. "Briggs did not mention it in his summary. No, she said. He wouldn't. Briggs's job is estate management, and tenant welfare is not the primary variable in estate management unless the person at the top makes it one. She kept her voice even, not accusing, informing. Your father made it one. I know this because your father is mentioned with some frequency by the people in Millhaven who remember him, and they mention him as a man who looked after his people. Nathaniel's jaw worked. You are right, he said. I should have asked Briggs specifically. Yes, she said. You should have. A silence. Not angry, or rather honest about the proximity of anger and choosing something better. What would you suggest? He said. I would suggest writing to Briggs today, she said, and asking him to provide the full picture of the Southern Quarter situation, including the tenant families, before you commit to anything. She paused. And I would suggest that future letters from Briggs come to us both if that is agreeable to you. He looked at her. To us both. This is my home, she said. These decisions affect the land adjacent to it and the people connected to it. I have been living here and managing this property for 8 months. I would like to be included in the decisions rather than reading about them after the fact. It was the most direct claim she had made on any part of their shared life. She could feel the weight of it, not the hostility of a challenge, but the substance of a real thing being asked. Nathaniel held her gaze for a moment. Yes, he said. Agreed. And then quieter. I should have thought to ask you before now. You should have, she said. But you are asking now. That is the more important part. She left him to write the letter to Briggs. She went back to the kitchen and found Hattie watching her with the expression of a woman who had heard every word through the study wall and was deeply satisfied by the outcome. Not a word, Elizabeth said. Wasn't planning on it, Hattie said. October arrived with the first cool nights and the particular quality of light that meant the summer was finished. Elizabeth was 4 months along now, visible undeniably, in a way that had stopped being deniable around the middle of September. She had not tried to deny it. She carried the pregnancy the way she carried most things, practically without drama, with a matter-of-factness that confused people who expected her to be either more fragile or more jubilant about it. She was neither. She was preparing. She was also, for the first time in the better part of a year, genuinely, quietly happy, or something close enough to happiness that the distinction did not seem worth making. Not the performed contentment her mother had worn. The real thing. The kind that does not require maintenance or announcement, because it is simply present in the ordinary moments. The morning coffee, the evening reading. The arguments that ended in something better than they started, the slowly accumulating evidence that the person beside her was against her most carefully guarded expectations, the person she had married and had not quite managed to stop believing in. That was the state of things when the second crisis arrived. It came from a direction she had not anticipated. It came from Martha. Her cousin Martha arrived on a Tuesday morning unannounced, which was unlike Martha, who usually sent word ahead, and Elizabeth knew from the quality of Martha's knock on the door that something was wrong. Martha had a knock for social calls and a knock for difficult news, and this was the latter. Sharp and close together, the knock of a woman who has been walking fast and thinking hard. Elizabeth opened the door. Martha came inside without being invited, which was also unlike her, and she pulled off her gloves and she looked at Elizabeth with the expression of someone about to deliver something unpleasant and feeling the full weight of the unpleasantness. There is talk, Martha said. Elizabeth felt the familiar gathering of herself. About what specifically? About you, about the pregnancy, about Elizabeth. There is a woman in Millhaven, a Mrs. Aldridge, whose husband does business with Thomas Carter Sr.'s people in Richmond. She has been saying. Martha stopped, steadied herself. She has been saying that the child is not Nathaniel's. The room went very still. She has been saying. Martha continued lower, that the marriage was already effectively dissolved when that you have been. The word she is using is, I understand the word, Elizabeth said. Her voice was entirely level. I don't need you to say it. Martha looked at her with the distressed helplessness of someone who loves you and cannot fix the thing that is hurting you. It is spreading, Eliza. The Aldridge woman has daughters, and she talks to the other mothers, and it is moving through the county. People are, People are believing it, Elizabeth said. Some people, Martha said miserably. Not everyone, but some. Elizabeth breathed once slowly through the wave of something not quite rage, not quite fear, something between them. The hot animal response to being wronged in a way that is specifically designed to take from you the thing you cannot defend without making it worse. Who told Mrs. Aldridge? Elizabeth said. Martha hesitated. Her husband got it from a man in Richmond who does business with Thomas Carter Sr.'s people, Elizabeth finished. Martha looked at her. You think I think, Elizabeth said carefully, that Thomas Carter Sr. is a man who plays the long game, and that when he accepted the outcome of July, he accepted it as the current position, not as the final one. She kept her voice very even. I think someone in his network decided that if the marriage could not be dissolved legally, it could be made untenable socially. The kitchen door opened. Nathaniel came in from the back. He had been in the yard with one of the field hands and took one look at Elizabeth's face and Martha's face and said, "What happened?" Elizabeth told him. She told him plainly without softening it, the way she told him all difficult things, now directly, completely trusting him to receive it without either collapsing or overreacting. He listened without interrupting. His face did something complicated and controlled while she spoke. When she finished, he said, Mrs. Aldridge's husband. His name is Gerald Aldridge, Martha said. He has a dry goods supply business contracts with several estates in the county, including Carter Valley, Nathaniel said. It was not a question. Martha looked at him. Yes. He was quiet for 4 full seconds. Elizabeth counted them. Then he said very quietly to Elizabeth, I need to go to Millhaven. Yes, she said, but not alone. He looked at her. Not this time, she said. This is about me, my name, my child. I will not sit at home while you manage it on my behalf. She held his gaze. We go together. He held her gaze in return, and then he nodded. Once. Firm. Together, he said. They rode into Millhaven that same afternoon, not with any planned announcement or any formal intent. They rode in together on the main road, in the full light of the October afternoon, visible and unhurried, the way people ride when they are not hiding from anything. Nathaniel rode beside her close enough that the horses were nearly shoulder to shoulder, and he was straight in the saddle and entirely composed in the way she had come to recognize as his version of anger, fully controlled and precisely directed. Their first stop was Reverend Aldous, who had been her father's oldest friend, and who still presided over the congregation most of Millhaven attended. He was a careful man and a fair one, and he had known Elizabeth since she was 8 years old, which meant he was one of the few people in the county whose opinion of her was not dependent on what other people said about her. He received them in his study. He listened to what Elizabeth told him. He looked at Nathaniel. He looked back at Elizabeth. The Aldridge woman has said this publicly, he said. In enough company that my cousin heard it, Elizabeth said, which means it is no longer private. Aldous folded his hands on the desk. And you want what exactly? A public statement from me. I want the truth told by people who know it, Elizabeth said. I am not asking you to defend me. I am asking you to tell when asked what you know to be true. She paused. You married us, Reverend. You know when this child was conceived is mathematically consistent with the marriage. Aldous looked at her steadily. I do know that, he said. Then say so, she said. When someone asks you, say so. He looked at Nathaniel. And you? You are prepared to stand behind this publicly. Completely, Nathaniel said, without qualification. Aldous studied him for a moment with the assessing look of a man who had heard a great many things said in earnest, and had learned to distinguish between the ones that would hold and the ones that wouldn't. Then he said, All right. Their second stop was Gerald Aldridge's dry goods establishment. She had not planned this stop. It had not been in any version of the plan she had formed on the ride into town. But when they passed the storefront and she saw Gerald Aldridge himself through the window, a broad, florid man who made the mistake of making eye contact with her and then looking away too quickly, something in Elizabeth made a decision that the rest of her caught up to a half-second later. Stop, she said to Nathaniel. He pulled up immediately. "Elizabeth, I want to go in," she said. He looked at her. He looked at the store. He looked back at her face, which was composed and clear and entirely decided. "All right," he said, and dismounted and came around to help her down, which she accepted because she was 4 months along, and the dismount was becoming less graceful than she preferred. They went in together. Gerald Aldridge had the look of a man who very much wished he had stepped into the back room 30 seconds ago. He was behind the counter and he straightened when they came in, and his eyes went to Elizabeth's face, and then to Nathaniel's, and then to a point somewhere between them that was not either of their faces. "Mr. Carter," he said. "Mrs. Carter, good afternoon." "Good afternoon, Mr. Aldridge," Elizabeth said. She crossed to the counter, and she stood at it with both hands folded in front of her, and she looked at him steadily. "I will not take much of your time. I simply want to tell you something directly, so that there is no confusion about what has been said, and by whom." Aldridge opened his mouth. "The story that has been circulating about this child and this marriage," Elizabeth said before he could speak, "is false. You know it is false because the man who gave it to your wife received it from a source with a specific interest in damaging this marriage, and that source had no factual basis for the claim. What they had was a motive." She held his gaze. "I do not believe you are a bad man, Mr. Aldridge. I believe you passed along something you were given without examining where it came from or why." She paused. "I am asking you now to examine it, and I am asking your wife to stop repeating it." Aldridge was red in the face. "Mrs. Carter, I am not finished," she said pleasantly. "My husband's family has several business contracts with your establishment. Those contracts are valuable to you, and they have been honored consistently by the Carter estate. I have no interest in disrupting a business relationship that works for everyone involved." She looked at him. "I do have an interest in my own name and the name of my child. Those interests are not negotiable." She held his gaze for one more beat. "I think we understand each other." Aldridge looked at Nathaniel, perhaps hoping for some male-to-male negotiation of the situation. Nathaniel said very quietly, "My wife has said everything that needs to be said." Aldridge looked back at Elizabeth. He swallowed. "I will speak to Mrs. Aldridge," he said. "Thank you," Elizabeth said. "Good afternoon." She turned and walked out. Nathaniel followed. Outside, he came alongside her, and they walked back to the horses, and he helped her mount and got up on his own horse, and they were a full block down the main street before he spoke. "That," he said, "was extraordinary." "That was necessary," she said. But she was, despite herself, slightly out of breath, not from exertion, from the concentrated force it had taken to be that precisely herself in that room. "He will talk to his wife. He absolutely will," Nathaniel said. He was looking at her with an expression she was still learning the full vocabulary of, something between admiration and something more fundamental than admiration, something that did not have a clean single word. "Are you all right?" "I am angry," she said. "But I am all right." "Good," he said. "Be angry. It suits you." She looked at him sideways. "Don't make it charming." "I'm not," he said. "I'm serious." He held her gaze across the horses. "You walked in there and you told a man the truth about himself, and you did it without cruelty and without losing your dignity for a single second. And that is—" He stopped. "Don't," she said. "Elizabeth." "Don't say it yet," she said. "Say it when we are home." A pause. "All right," he said. They rode home. The talk in Mill Haven did not stop entirely that week. Talk never stops entirely. It diminishes, it changes shape. It loses confidence in itself as new information crowds out the old, but it does not simply cease. What happened was slower and more thorough than cessation. Reverend Aldous, asked directly by 3 separate parishioners over the following Sunday, said what he knew plainly and without drama. Martha, who had a sharper tongue than Elizabeth when it was needed, said what she knew to 2 of the county's most efficient gossips and left the rest to arithmetic. Nathaniel Carter, who had been quietly present in Mill Haven on 2 occasions that week, and who was known as a man of few public words and unimpeachable reliability, was asked by the county magistrate, an old friend of his father's, whether the rumors were true and said no, they were not. And the magistrate accepted this, the way the county accepted Nathaniel Carter's word, without further question. The story didn't die. It became less interesting than the counter-story, which was always the more effective outcome. November settled over Whitmore Hill, with the particular quiet that comes after a crisis has passed, and the ordinary business of living reasserts itself. Elizabeth was 5 months along. The child moved for the first time on a Thursday evening, while she was sitting in the front room with a book, and she went very still for a moment, and pressed her hand against her side, and felt it again, faint, unmistakable, the small interior percussion of a new person announcing their presence. "Nathaniel," she said. He looked up from the desk. She did not say anything else. She just held out her hand. He came across the room. He sat beside her. She took his hand and placed it where hers had been. They waited. It came again, that small, impossible movement. Nathaniel's face did something she had never seen it do before. Not in the careful months of their courtship, not in the difficult weeks of July, not in any of the honest conversations of August and September. It simply opened, all the way. Without guard or performance or management, just a man feeling something so large that his face could not find any form for it except complete openness. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "Hello," to the child, to his hand against her side, to the small presence announcing itself in the November evening. Elizabeth looked at his face and felt the thing she had been managing for months, the thing she had pressed down and been practical about and held at arm's length and examined skeptically, simply let go of its management and become what it was. She was in love with her husband. She had probably been in love with him since considerably before July. She had been too busy surviving the consequences of that love to attend to the love itself, which was, she recognized exactly the kind of thing her mother would have done, and she had promised herself she would not. She did not say it that evening. She was not ready to say it yet, and readiness mattered to her. Saying things before you were ready to fully mean them was its own kind of dishonesty, but she stopped managing it. December brought Thomas Carter Sr., again the third visit, the one she had known would come. He arrived with 2 days' notice this time, a formal letter addressed to both of them. He came in a different carriage, smaller, plainer, which she filed away as deliberate. He came in the afternoon, and he sat in the front room, and he looked at Elizabeth 6 months along, and entirely herself, and he said, "You are well." "Very well," she said. He looked at Nathaniel. "The Aldridge matter. Resolved," Nathaniel said. "I was not involved in that," Thomas said. Both of them looked at him. "I want to be clear," Thomas said, with the discomfort of a man saying something that costs him his customary armor. "What Gerald Aldridge's wife said that did not come from me. It came from a man in Richmond who has done minor work for my solicitor, and who apparently believed he was serving my interests by—" He stopped. "He was dismissed. The day I found out." Silence. Elizabeth studied his face. She was very good at reading underneath Thomas Carter Sr.'s formal delivery. She found something she had not expected. Not guilt exactly, he was not built for guilt the way other people were. But discomfort. The specific discomfort of a man who has discovered that people who thought they were serving him did something he did not sanction and would not have sanctioned. "I believe you," she said. Thomas looked at her. "You do?" "Yes," she said. "You are many things, Mr. Carter, but you are not a man who makes war on pregnant women through anonymous gossip. That is too small for you." She held his gaze. "Your methods are more direct. I respect that even when I disagree with the direction." Something shifted in his face, that small repositioning again, the cartographic adjustment. "You are a remarkable woman," he said. It came out as though he had not intended to say it and had not managed to stop it. "I know," she said simply, without false modesty and without performance. And Thomas Carter Sr., for the first and only time in her experience of him, made a sound that was startlingly close to a laugh. The baby came in January. Not in the dramatic middle-of-the-night way of stories, but on a Wednesday afternoon quietly, and with more efficiency than Dr. Prentice had expected from a first birth, while Nathaniel paced the hallway with the focused agitation of a man who was very good at being in control of things and had absolutely no control over this particular thing. Hattie managed everything with the authority of a woman who had attended a great many births and found the drama surrounding them mostly unnecessary. She came out of the bedroom after 2.5 hours and said, "A girl, both fine," and then went back in before Nathaniel could ask any of the 17 questions that were visible on his face. Elizabeth heard him come into the room because Hattie let him in and then left with the particular tact she deployed when it was most needed. He sat beside the bed. He looked at the child, small, red-faced, entirely certain of her own importance despite being approximately 4 hours old, and then at Elizabeth, who was tired in the profound and specific way of someone who has just done something extremely difficult and is not yet able to fully believe it is done. "She has your eyes," he said. "She has no idea what her eyes are yet," Elizabeth said. "She is 4 hours old. She has your mouth," he said. "That particular expression." "What expression?" "The one that says she has already decided something and is not going to be talked out of it." Elizabeth looked at the child. The child looked back at the middle distance with the ancient oceanic focus of the newborn. "She is 4 hours old," Elizabeth said again. "She has not decided anything." "She has decided she is here," Nathaniel said. "And that seems to be sufficient for now." Elizabeth looked at him at his face in the January afternoon, open the way it had been in November, when the child had moved for the first time without guard or performance. She looked at him, and she thought about the stone inside the peach, and her mother's grave, and the promise she had made at 16, and the walk home from Dr. Prentice's office, and the morning she had pressed her hands flat against the kitchen table and counted what she had. She thought about how long she had been so determined not to be kept that she had nearly missed the difference between being kept and being chosen. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes, I love you," she said. "I have loved you for I don't know exactly when it started. Before July, possibly before February." She held his gaze. "I did not tell you because I was afraid of what it would cost me, and because I needed to know that you were choosing me rather than being obligated to me. I needed to know the difference." He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were doing the thing she had learned not to look away from, the full, unguarded thing. "I know the difference," he said. "And I have been choosing you since the morning I came to Whitmore Hill and could not say yes when you asked me whether I wanted the marriage to be over." He reached out and covered her hand with his, the same gesture as always, simple and unhesitating. "I could not say yes because it was not what I wanted. It has never been what I wanted." She breathed. "All right," she said. Not the careful provisional all right of July. Not the beginning of something all right of August. The full and final all right of a woman who has decided with complete information and clear eyes and her own full agency that this is what she wants. The child made a small sound between them, not a cry, just a sound. The sound of someone who is present and intends to continue being present, and would like this noted. "Hello," Elizabeth said to her the same word Nathaniel had said in November through her hand in the evening. "We have been waiting for you." Years later, when people in Millhaven spoke of the Carters of Whitmore Hill, they did not speak of the dissolution papers, or the forged letter, or Gerald Aldridge's wife, and the rumors she had carried for 2 weeks in October before they withered under the weight of documented truth. They did not speak of Thomas Carter Sr.'s 3 visits, or the solicitor Marsh, or the unsigned document that had once sat on a kitchen table while a mockingbird carried on outside. They spoke of the family itself, of the way Nathaniel Carter had moved his entire professional life 30 miles from Carter Valley because his wife had asked to be included in the decisions, and he had said yes and meant it. They spoke of the way Elizabeth Carter had built a small lending library in the Millhaven Church Hall with her own books and her own labor, because she believed that women who could read were women who could not be so easily managed. They spoke of the annual dinner at Whitmore Hill, where tenant families and town families ate at the same table, which was Elizabeth's idea, and which Nathaniel had implemented without being asked twice. They spoke most often of the girl, dark-haired, willful, already reading at 3 and arguing at 4, and absolutely certain of herself, in the way that her mother had always been certain, with the additional advantage of having been raised by 2 people who had learned at some cost the difference between obligation and love, and had chosen love loudly and on purpose. Thomas Carter Sr. visited every Christmas until he was no longer able to travel. He sat in the front room and drank his coffee and argued about county politics with Elizabeth, who was one of the very few people in Virginia who could make him reconsider a position he had held for 30 years by the simple method of presenting a fact he had not accounted for. He never said he had been wrong about July. He never needed to. The evidence of his error was in every room of the house, and he was a man who was too honest at bottom to pretend the evidence wasn't there. On his last Christmas visit, he sat in the chair by the window and watched Elizabeth across the room. She was reading to the girl some story. They were both deeply invested in arguing amiably about what the characters should have done differently, and he said to Nathaniel very quietly without preamble, "Your father would have loved her." "I know," Nathaniel said. "He would have told me I was a fool. He would have been diplomatic about it. He would have been right about it," Thomas said. And he drank his coffee and said nothing else, and the fire burned, and the girl argued about the story, and Elizabeth laughed, and the house was full of the particular warmth of a life that had been chosen rather than fallen into. That was how it had always been meant to be. Not found. Chosen. Every day with full knowledge for exactly the right reasons. And that, as Elizabeth Carter had understood since she was 16 years old, standing at her mother's grave in the Virginia spring, making a promise to herself that she intended to keep, was the only kind of love worth having.